did you first find
Yeah.
out that you had cancer?
Yeah, it was a process of discovery, really. I had a physical at the age of 56, and at that during that physical, I took my doctor recommended getting a PSA test, and the PSA tested in the normal range, but I was on a medication called finasteride, and I took that medication to prevent hair loss, which is mostly genetic, and my brothers and father had all lost their hair at a very early age, and you can see now I've lost it. I'm no longer on finasteride,
Looks good.
and yeah, and it's easy to comb, and so it's fast to take care of. So so I took this blood test, and the PSA scored in the normal range. But one of the questions I had from my primary care doctor was, well, how do we know if this is in the normal range? Because I know we both knew that finasteride could suppress the PSA score, and so we didn't, neither one of us knew. A lot of doctors at that time, and even today, a lot of good doctors don't know that they should multiply the PSA score by 2.5 times for anyone who's been on finasteride for 7 years or more. And I had been on it for, 15 or so years at the time. So that led us to underestimate the score. And then the next year, my symptoms, I had some symptoms of prostate cancer, mostly nocturia, this urge to urinate multiple times overnight. And that had worsened. And I said, gee, at my next annual physical, should we test this again? And he was reluctant and said, been, it was well in the normal range. Let's go another year and test it again next year. And of course, by the time we tested it the following year, it had more, my PSA level had more than tripled. And he said, okay, this is a yellow, if not a red flag. And so then I went to a urologist, and the urologist said, well, the PSA score, even though it's high and out above the normal range, it's not, super high. And again, I had the same conversation about finasteride and well, what do we need to multiply the score by? And he's like, I'm not sure what we should multiply it by, but it wouldn't be, he said the risk would be minuscule to wait, do some more blood tests to see if they go down or up. And so, wait 60 days, do another blood test, and which I did. And that blood test actually indicated the PSA level went down a little bit. So then he set up a meeting with me a few months later, and we met again. And he said, your PSA level actually went down. And I was reluctant to do an invasive biopsy at this point because there was nothing that indicated, irrefutably that I had cancer. And so he said, why don't we schedule an MRI? He says, an MRI generally doesn't tell you that you don't have cancer, but sometimes it tells you if you do. And but of course, all of these steps took time, right? So by the time I even had this appointment, now 5 months had gone by in total from the higher PSA score, and 2 years had gone by before I had the higher. So it's almost been 2.5 years before I now have this MRI. And now I have the MRI, and that's when we knew, because the doctor called me literally the next morning, and he said, you definitely, it looks like you have cancer, and we definitely have to do the biopsy, and we've got to get you in right away. And so whatever he saw, he wasn't happy about.
So I want to ask this question because this is always that pivotal moment, and I remember that moment, and
Yeah.
and I know, John, you're a data guy and you've been in healthcare, and so for you, the data's got to prove that this is really happening, right? So I'm assuming that your mind was, well, I don't really, I'm not in danger here, right? I'm assuming that's where your mind was. And then you get told you have cancer. What
Yeah.
went through your mind at that moment?
Well, it was a bit of a shock, and not that it was what was shocking about it was I had just literally taken the MRI at like 9 p.m. the next day or the day before, which was like the only time I could get to book the appointment was really at night. I was trying to get this in with it. The appointments were months out. So the only one I could get within 6 weeks of his recommendation was like a nighttime appointment. It was like a Sunday night at 9 o'clock that I got the MRI. And he called, like I literally arrived at my office and my phone rang and it was my doctor. And so it literally had been less than 12 hours since I had taken so I was like really caught off guard by the phone call. And I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't good.
So
But I
you're at
also knew because
CVS at this time, right? You're at
no, at
yeah.
that time it was 2020. Okay, so the at that time it was 2022. So this was March of 2022.
Right. Okay.
So I was at BJ's Wholesale Club. I was the head of optical for BJ's Wholesale Club. And they had literally just reopened their office. And so it was one of my first days back in the office. And I had started remotely, right? Because I started during COVID. And so it
Okay.
was sort of one of my early days back. So I'm going in the office, I'm still unpacking things, and my phone rings, and it's a doctor saying you have cancer and we've got to do a biopsy right away. And but I also knew because I read a lot about prostate cancer that it had a pretty wide range of risk. That most prostate cancer was low risk as opposed to high risk, and that 98% of men diagnosed with prostate cancer survive 10 years or more. So I wasn't panicked. I was unhappy. I was concerned. I was worried, but I wasn't really I wasn't panicked or freaked out in any way. That sort of came later. that
Right.
that we scheduled surgery. Well, first we didn't schedule the surgery. I started researching what's the right treatment that I should be getting well, the very first thing we did was schedule the biopsy. So now we scheduled the biopsy, and that was just a few days later. So we got that in right away. And the biopsy now took it up a notch. So the results of the biopsy now showed, well, I don't just have prostate cancer, but I have Gleason 9 prostate cancer, which is, the Gleason score for prostate cancer ranges from 6 through 10. So 10 is the worst, and 6 is low grade cancer. So 9 is pretty. Very few people have 10. Most people who have 10 are fully metastasized, and many people with 9 are pretty fully metastasized too. So I knew this was bad news to have that kind of a Gleason score at the biopsy. So now it's a week later, and now I went from, okay, I'm not panicked to I'm starting to get a little panicked. I'm starting to realize this is pretty bad. Now, on the positive side, the MRI did not reveal metastasis to the lymph nodes. It did not reveal something called extraprostatic extension, that the cancer had broken through the prostate capsule. It appeared to be contained. And so I had that hope in the back of my mind that, that this was going to be a contained situation. And so now I quickly started researching the alternatives for treatment. There's radiation, there's surgery, there's different types of radiation, ranging from proton to photon to X-ray. And so I started to research what treatments are the right treatments for someone with the kind of biopsy I had. And I concluded that surgery was the right way for me to go as the next step.
So in all that, what was the most difficult part of that process for you?
Well, the next step is the part that was probably the most difficult, right? So
Okay.
now I go into surgery and I'm hopeful that I've got a contained situation. I've got aggressive cancer, but I'm hopeful that it's contained. And I feel like there's about a 70% chance that it is contained. And I come out of surgery I'm in the hospital for 2 days. I come home the second day, and literally, it's the day after I get home, and I'm starting to walk around a little bit, and I get this ping, on my email. It alerts me that an email has arrived, and I open it, and it's, my healthcare portal from my hospital saying you've got a test result has arrived, and it was the tissue exam from the biopsy of the tissue after the removal of my prostate. And they don't just remove the prostate in my case, but they removed lymph nodes and some surrounding tissue so they could examine it to make sure that they got all of the cancer. And I had read, what does a good tissue exam result look like and what does a bad result look like? And right there staring me in the face is the email. Now, interestingly enough, the hospital system that sends you results that I was working with at the time, when the results are abnormal or bad, they put this big red exclamation point in a circle. So you almost know that the test results are bad before you open them because they don't give you the red exclamation point unless it's an abnormal test result. So I knew because I see the red exclamation point, I'm like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
And then I click on the results and I'm looking for certain things that I've read are going to be bad indicators. First, is it grade group 5? Is there is there Gleason 9 in both lobes of the prostate that they removed? And yes, so okay, there's a bad sign. Second, is there perineural invasion? That means that the cancer had concentrated around the nerve center of the prostate where it's more likely to escape and generally has higher risk of metastasis. That was another yes. And then the next thing I look at is, did I have extra prosthetic extension? Was the prostate coming out? Was it outside of the capsule? Yes, again. So now I'm 0 for 3. And then the fourth thing, which is probably the worst one, was there cancer in the lymph nodes that they removed, which would indicate that the prostate cancer had spread to the local lymphatic system. And yes, again. And then the last thing that you look at is are there positive surgical margins? And what that means, positive surgical margins mean when they're looking at the tissue that's been removed, can they see that the edge of where it was cut, was there cancer along that edge, meaning some cancer was probably left inside because the margins are positive, meaning the cancer was cut through during the surgical procedure to remove it. And again, I have yes under the positive surgical margin. So I'm basically, 0 for 5. And so this is the moment where it's like, oh my God, this is bad news.
So at that point, I mean, would you say that was the lowest point in this
I
process?
would,
Because
I would.
yeah, and so here you are going through that, and how's your family? Like, how do you, right? Because I remember being a cancer patient, there's you who's going through this, but then you also you carry this heavy weight of how do you comfort your family because of what you're going through, right? It's just you're
Yeah.
there's that dichotomy that's happening. How was
Yes.
that?
Yeah, and I know you're familiar with that as well, and so it's great because you totally understand. So until that moment, until I opened that email, I was being very positive and optimistic, and this is going to be one and done. Get the surgery, get the cancer out, life will go back to normal. Everything's going to be great, and that's how I presented it to my family, my wife, my kids, and then now I get this result, and at that point, that was the point where I was, I was gonna, I talked to my wife, and it just was, we had a very candid conversation, and then I said, I think, I'm going to be honest with the kids and just, tell it like it is. This is not a good prognosis, but there are things that I can do, um, and so I'm going to start figuring out what those things are. And and so, we brought the kids in the room, and unfortunately, my kids were young adults at the time. They were in their early 20s, so this wasn't, they weren't like little kids, which I think makes it helpful. And I just was straight with them about, this is a bad prognosis, but at the same time, there's prostate cancer tends to be a slow-moving cancer. It isn't always, but there are other treatments I can pursue and other things I can do. And there's a lot of potential for me to continue to live a long, healthy life. And I'm going to figure out what that is. And it's funny because my kids both know, as you sort of have appreciated, I guess, through our work experience, but they know that I'm super analytical and I'm super studious and research. And they're like, Dad, if anybody's going to figure this out, you're going to figure this out.
So I think
And
that's really interesting. And I'm going to just note this, but I want to come back to that point because what you just said is, when you sat your family down and you said, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to work through this. I'm going to try to understand what's going on and figure out a path forward. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people are not thinking, oh my gosh, I'm in this dire situation. Like what next? Like, let me start finding a solution immediately. And I go back to our environment where we work, right? Our corporate environment, our career track, right? We were always looking for solutions, looking to find solutions to very complex issues, right? And so that's just something that's innate about you. And I'm going to touch on that here in a second. But at at what point, well, no, I want to go back to this. You mentioned that in our previous conversation that one of the doctors said there was nothing they could do for you. Is that right?
well, the first doctor I went to say what kind of treatment should I what should I do next? And this was a radiation oncologist, and he said nothing. And that was incredibly bad advice, by the way. And Fortunately, I didn't listen to him. And I went. I said, I'm going to get multiple opinions, and I went and and I did that. But I want to touch on something because I don't want to over project how strong I was at that moment in time. Like I didn't just go, "Hey, I'm going to solve it." Like,
Right. No, I
yes,
get
that's
it.
what I told my kids, but I was like emotionally, it was devastating, and I was just, why me? I had all of those reactions. I tried to not project that, but that was what was going through me internally, and it wasn't just like, hey, I'm going to figure this out. It was the worst several weeks of my life, and I was, really distraught. And even though I was balancing that with, I've got to figure this out, but I was also very distraught, and I knew that great change was in the future for me, and it was very tough, and it was a tough time, and so I don't want to overproject my strength. I went through that emotional roller coaster and hit that emotional low point for sure. But all the while, even despite experiencing those emotions, I was, okay, I've got to figure out what next. I have to determine if I should be getting more treatment or not. I have to determine what else I can do that might help shift the odds in my direction, whatever that is. And and so I managed to continue doing that research despite being on this very low point on the emotional roller coaster. I just kept plugging away, but it was difficult because I was just very depressed and very, very devastated by the news. It wasn't like I don't want to project like this false sense of strength that I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna go get to work on this. I mean, yes, I did that, but that's not how, I was internally, I was, there were friends I called and cried to and was upset with and was, was upset in front of. I started calling everybody on my personal board of directors that I could to say, what would you do in this situation? And took copious notes and got some great advice from my friends and a lot of my CVS colleagues, and and started started trying to unlock those solutions. But to your point, we were, as executives, we were sort of trained in this, be curious, problem solve. What do you need to do? And I think that was really helpful because I continued doing that despite these emotional lows.
So in that moment, I'm sensing that that's when something in like because you researched, you ran data, you were looking for solutions, you were calling people, getting kind of gauging how people would react in this moment. At what point did you feel you had a dramatic shift? Because there was a point for me where I had a dramatic shift. And I'm curious to know where that shift for you in your mindset came.
Yeah, I think I know exactly where and when it came. So now, after that day of terribly bad news, I now go through this 8 week massive research project, which
Okay.
included consultation with some of the best oncologists in the world. 3 doctors at Dana-Farber, 2 doctors at UMass. For me, like a second opinion, no, that's not enough. I'm going to get a third. I'm going to get a fourth. I'm going to get as many opinions as I can. And not just these experts, but I'm going to do my own research. I'm going to read everything I can. I'm going to talk to prostate cancer survivors. I'm going to talk to people who had bad prognostic indicators. I'm going to figure out what they did, and I'm going to connect with them. And so I over the course of the 8 weeks, I did all of that research. And now the 8 weeks is over, and I've drawn the conclusion that I do need additional treatment. I need 2 years of additional treatment in the form of ADT, androgen deprivation treatment, and I need 8 weeks of relatively high dose radiation treatment in my pelvic region. And I've got to get going on that. And so now I've made that decision that I'm going to do this treatment. And
Right.
I decide I'm going to do that at Dana-Farber. I'm going to transfer my care from where I was over to Dana-Farber, which is just a terrific, you know, um, Mass Brigham and Women's. It goes by different names, it's always confusing,
Right.
but anyway, you know the drill. So I decide now that I've landed on the treatment I'm going to get, that is when the turnaround happened. Okay, I'm in it. I'm about to go into this 2 year journey, and I've got to do more to make sure that this journey, which is going to have lots of side effects, that I minimize the side effects of that journey, so that when I get through it, I can, I can be as healthy as I possibly can coming out the other side. And that was when it started. Like literally, like the first day of treatment, which was June 21st. So I got that terrible email on April 20th. So literally 61 days later, that was the day that my mindset completely shifted from, this is awful, why me, to what am I going to do about it? Not just what am I going to do about it, but here's what I know I'm going to do about it at this moment in time. And I know I'm going to know even more a week, 2 weeks, 2 months, 3 months from now. But this is what I'm going to do right now. And I started that journey.